Hello. So my other discussion is on Fats Waller. So a little bit about Fats Waller is his name is Thomas Wright Waller, and he would go by the nickname Fats. Not only was he a well-known jazz pianist, but he was also a singer and a songwriter. He was born in New York in 1904 of May 21st into a very large family. He was the seventh sibling out of 11 siblings. However, only 5 of his siblings had including him, had reached it to adulthood, and he had passed away in 1943 of December 15th, unfortunately, because his lifestyles had caught up to him. He was a partier, partied all the time, and he drank a lot, and he loved to eat food. And also because of his work, he also, was on tour a lot, and in result, he just didn't get as much sleep as he should. So he was on tour when this was going on. He, had gotten sick actually and contracted pneumonia and passed away from that on his train ride back home. Um, but he was always very talented, ever since he was a little child. His mother was a musician, and she was able to teach him how to play piano. So by the time he was 6 years old, he's already playing piano, and he's playing anything and everything he can get his hands on, from religious music, classical music, to Scott Joplin. And his father was also a deacon at the Abyssinian Baptist Church, so Fats would sneak in occasionally and play the organ there. However, he would get in trouble sometimes, but he just loved to play and he would always play when he could. And so by the time he was 10 years old, he was already very skillful at playing the organ. And that's when he had his first concert, his first audiences as well, when he would play at his father's church. When he played piano, he brought his entire personality with him, and this is what made him so successful in his career. Just his facial expressions, you could see all the personality there. He used a lot of different elements that he had. He had talents in being comedic. And so when he would play piano, it wasn't just playing, he would perform, and it would be so entertaining for people to watch. And it was just what made him so successful, is how he just really tied all of those talents together. By the time he was at age 15, he was already playing piano professionally, and at age 16, he was an established songwriter. During this time as well is when his mother had passed away, and he took it really hard. So he moved out and he moved in with his one of his friends and their family. And so this was around 1920s when he was 16, and so he would sneak out around 2 a.m. from their house and go to shows and cabarets and theaters and watch people perform and try to perform himself as well. And this is when he became deeply influenced by James P. Johnson. And I think it was his friend who was the one who introduced the two of them together. But James P. Johnson had this amazing musical impact. He was known as the father of stride piano. So not only did he really influence Fats Waller, but he really influenced the music during this era. So he was a very crucial figure in the transition from ragtime to jazz music. So ragtime was starting to evolve, and this is the one of the first jazz techniques in piano that was um, coined by James P. Johnson. He had created this, and so what it is well, he called it the Harlem Stride technique, or the Harlem Stride. That was the idiom he had created, and the stride has a fast tempo and an improv style of swing, and that's how it evolved from ragtime, because it has that swing to it. So with the left hand, he would play the bass notes. It would play a 10th chord, which is a really hard chord to play. So a lot of your your um your talent was also dependent on your physical ability to play that chord. So Fats Waller, I guess, had big hands or long fingers because it was easy for him to do. It came very natural for him to play that 10th, because not only would he play the 10th with the two fingers, with the middle fingers, he would also play just little bits, like little notes here and there, and Some stride pianists had trouble just playing that 10th alone. For example, one stride pianist, Earl Hines, between the thumb and the pointer finger, that little webbing here, he actually had like an insertion cut there just for him to be able to extend his fingers a little farther to be able to play that chord. And since it's in the bass notes over here, it's going to be just very loud. And they needed it to be very loud because if they're playing at the rent parties, they're going to, it's going to be so loud, there's so much commotion. They need their music to still be able to be heard. So they played so that that bass was very important and it would fill the role that like a bass violin would play. And then with the right hand, this is where it's gonna be improv, and this is where it's really, just taking that evolving from ragtime too. So we're keeping that swing kind of style, but it's just a faster tempo and with the improv in the right hand. And this was also able to allow for other pianists to have different stride, you know, like techniques or like style. Like they could all have their own unique style because of that improvisation. Um, and Fats Waller was also adding a little bit more to his technique as well by incorporating singing with it also. It was really cool because what they were able to do is they were able to just play and not have to stare at the notes. They were so talented, they could just look up at the audience and have conversations and just really multitask like that. And I think that's so fascinating. That takes a lot of technique and skill. And so, James P. Johnson went ahead and made this jazz-like orchestral arrangement called the Yamakra, a Negro Rhapsody. And this has a classic piano concerto format blended with Black musical idioms because Yamakra, as you can see in the picture here, is a Black neighborhood that is on the outskirts of Savannah, Georgia, and I think that's where, James P. Johnson grew up, so he was able to incorporate that just history and, expression into his music, and I thought that was just really amazing, and, this was premiered at the Carnegie Hall by Fats Waller, and this was the first time Fats Waller was serious. He is such a happy-go-lucky guy, and, um sorry, my cat is distracting me. He is such a happy-go-lucky guy, and so he would always have that personality with him when he would play, and, um, yeah, he would always have that personality with him when he would play, and during this moment, it was just a very serious moment, so he took it very seriously, and he didn't sing, he didn't bring that personality with his facial expressions, he just wanted to keep it very serious, and so, it definitely lacked some of the elements that his other shows typically do, but it was still such an amazing opportunity that he got to be able to perform this. Willie the Lion Smith was another stride pianist who worked with Fats Waller, and it was really cool because, well, James P. Johnson had introduced Fats to Willie, and he was like, "Hey, let this man play the piano here." And then Willie the Lion Smith was like, "Not in those knickers, he's not." And so he went out and got Fats Waller his first pair of long pants, and that was just a very very sweet. He just wanted him to have the whole look when he played piano. So, what was the life like in Harlem around this time? So, Harlem buzzed with life all around the clock. It was 24/7. No one slept because when the bars would close, the after hour places would open. And so everyone was out and about. It was so lively. And how did this vibrant atmosphere come to be? So during the Great Migration, tens and thousands of African Americans fled the South to leave racial oppressions and inequalities and in search for educational and economical opportunities. So this was at the start of World War One, and the migration continued for decades. And Among the African Americans that had migrated, there were musicians, dancers, poets, and artists. These intellectuals and creators rejected imitation. They rejected imitation, so they weren't just going to come into America and start doing everything the way Americans will be doing everything. They they wanted to embrace their Southern roots and express Black urban life uniquely through all the mediums of literacy and arts, and this really challenged white paternalism. And there was this huge struggle for African Americans coming here to pursue the American dream because of the discrimination and fractured sense of identity. It was really hard for them to know their roots because a lot of it was slavery, and they were just kind of making a new culture for themselves. And their roots was kind of just abstract to them. And so in Nathan Hughes' book, chapter 4, Art, the Black Identity, there's a quote I wanted to read that just really emphasizes this point here. So it's the Negro's search for self. The Negro's search for self was closer to that of the deracinated young post-war intellectuals that Malcolm Calloway describes in Exile's Return than that of the immigrants, because the immigrants coming to America were able to continue on this progressive dream, unlike African Americans. So both the Negroes and the uprooted youth were cut off from a past to which they could not return and with which they could not identify. At the same time, they were both unrelated to the American progress in amassing wealth, building machines, and producing things. The one because he was repulsed by the Philistine, and the other because racism denied him the American dream. Both were Americans, having no other past, and thus were subject to greater hopes, expectations, bitterness, and despair than were the immigrants. There is a real importance and difference between being alien and being alienated. Being a stranger to something which is your becoming, or being native to something of which you are not a part of. And that was a really nice quote from that from that chapter that really resonated with me. The first time I read it, I didn't really understand it as much, but after really just thinking about it more thoroughly, it's very true. Like just this challenge to pursue the American dream because this is where they're native to, but because of this racism, they're unable to, and they have to just really show every achievement they have to try and earn this freedom that they deserve. So, after the war, African Americans are still fighting for their freedom. So during the war, they actually had the first African American regime, and they fought. Oh, it was a combat regime, and they fought in French. And it so one notable person in the war here, it was Henry Johnson, and he wasn't really set up for success from the US government, unfortunately, um, because, the US government was saying everyone who's gonna fight for this flag, is gonna fight in our country. But you guys can go over to French and fight over there. So it's kind of like this like backhanded thing he did to African Americans. And so they were fighting over with the French. And so Henry Johnson, it was him and his lieutenant, and there's this like French raid coming, and his lieutenant, I think, is unconscious. He passes out. So he's fighting all alone. And unfortunately his gun is unable to work because it's a American gun, but with a French cartridge. So it had gotten jammed. So he couldn't use it. And all he had on him was like this knife, and he fought them all single-handedly. It was like dozens of of German raiders, and he was able to fight them all, and he survived it, and the French commended him with, an award, and it was just just such a proud moment, and for his, like, hard work, he showed so much there, and when he returned to the US, they never actually gave him that award and recognized that until well after he had passed away is when they finally acknowledged it, and that really sucked, and, um and it sucked because he was very injured after the war, and and he couldn't work, and they never put that on his documents. So, that just shows how hard these African Americans are having to fight for the freedom. And so after the war is over, everybody is just so happy, and there's so much changes that are really happening now after everything that went into the war. There's so much changes going on, and so Harlem is just the center of all of this. This is one of the big destinations a lot of African Americans had traveled to, and so they're able to express their mediums in this place here in Harlem, and this is what really led to the Harlem Renaissance. There was so much art, there was so much music, there was so much novels, literacy, poems, and it was just a lot that came after this migration and war. Harlem became just this lively city. So a little bit about the successes of Fats Waller. So he was so talented playing the organ. It was definitely his favorite instrument of between the two, the piano and the organ. And through that talent playing the organ, it landed him his first job at the Lincoln Theater. And he would actually shadow one of the girls, the women who would work there, until she was just ready to leave. He was able to take her position and he would get paid $23 a week. And it was really cool what he did. He would play organ for silent movies, and so he had to just match the mood, what he was playing on the organ to the mood on the screen, but he would get so invested with what he's playing, he would forget to check back up on the screen to make sure that the mood he's playing still matches the mood on screen. And in 1922, at the age of 18, he wrote and recorded two of his own compositions in the OK Records studio. And in 1924, the composition by Fats, Squeeze Me, was broadcasted to a wide audience, becoming a fan favorite. Fats Waller collaborated with lyricist Andy Resolve and created Ain't Misbehavin', Honeysuckle Rose, and This Joint is Jumpin'. And these are really really great songs, very creative. And I loved This Joint is Jumping. That was one of my favorites of him. And that's one of the ones I was really able to see his personality shining through just watching it. You could just it's so entertaining. It's not just listening to music, but you have a whole show there. And Andy Resolve was much more serious with the business than Fats Waller. He was more happy-go-lucky, and, so Andy Resolve was really just the one who really ensured that they got the royalties for all of their songs that they were creating. In 1930s, was the start of his very successful radio career. And in this poster here, this is really cool because this poster is actually being auctioned right now for $3,000, which is insane. It's preserved in good condition, and this was just a poster that they had up during this era, and um, it's really cool to see how they were able to really incorporate Fats Waller's characteristics into the poster because when you're playing stride piano, it's all about your left hand holding those notes, and then your right hand is able to improv and do all kinds of things. So here, he has his left hand on the piano, like he's, doing his stride, but his left hand's able to improv and he's like waving. So it's just really cool to see those very subtle characteristics incorporated into the poster. And then there's a slogan here called Radio's Harmful Little Armful, which is a very cute slogan. And it's just really to encapture his comedian side because everyone knows him as a pianist, a performer, he sings, but that slogan really captures his comedian side as well. And this here is stamped by the Colombian Broadcasting Service Systems. And so, yeah, it was really cool just to see this poster. And in 1934, Fats formed a band, Fats Waller and His Rhythm, and it was a sextet featuring a guitar, trumpet, and a clarinet. And they recorded over 50 sessions in 9 years. In 1938, he made his first tour in UK and Europe. And that was one of his last tours as well that he had done. And he was so successful. He created so much for the Harlem Renaissance era. Um, with James P. Johnson really, being the father of stride and then being able to mentor Fats, he was able to just really take it to another level and incorporate lyricism into the music and became so well known and had such a successful life. Unfortunately, a very short life as well, though. And just something else, just on the side note, like that was just really fun to know about Fats Waller is he was kidnapped at a time. It was back when he was playing his first job still at the Lincoln Theater, and he asked if he could take a break. He wants to go on tour, and they gave that to him. And so he went on tour, and he finds himself in Chicago, and he's performing at the Sherman Hotel. And as he's just done with his performance, he's leaving the hotel, and this big car pulls up, and these two guys get out and have him at gunpoint, and they kidnap him and blindfold him, put him in the car, and and then they take him over to another hotel. So this is the same day that, he had arrived in Chicago and performed. It's the same day as the biggest gangster in America, Al Capone. So his fan base really reached everybody. Like that's how successful he was. His fan base even reached the mafia. And so um as a surprise for Al Capone for his birthday, the two gangsters thought it would be really fun to bring Fats over since he was in town the same day and have him perform there. So Fats has no idea what's going on. He's in the car, blindfolded. He doesn't know where they're going. And he was being walked through yet again another hotel all the way to the back. And they reached like this piano in the center of like this lavish party. So they take off the blindfold and he's no longer at gunpoint once they reach the piano. And he looks around and he's like getting a sense of where he's at. All of that fear and adrenaline is just kind of subsiding, and he's able to like, okay, I'm at a party, and he sees the piano, and he knows what to do now. He's like, okay, you guys brought me here to play, and so he starts to play the piano, and he is there for 3 days playing the piano. And he barely leaves the piano during this time. He takes his naps at the piano. Food and beverages are catered to him. And it's said that for every song he performed, $100 was also slipped into his pocket. So after the performing for Al Capone's party, he was able they took him back to the Sherman Hotel, probably blindfolded him again so they can keep their location kind of a secret, and took him back over to the hotel that they kidnapped him from. And they were off on their way, and he never seen Al Capone ever again. Just it's just really crazy to see how far his fan base reached everybody and all of the successes that Sweller had. Just as a side note too, this is I was watching this Disney Channel show called That's So Raven, if you're familiar with it. But it's this girl, Raven, the main character, who has like these visions, and she sh- she's in a home in a what is it called? A retirement home. And she was talking to an older lady there, and she turns out to be like this actress, and she was young, and she wanted to perform and she never had the chance to perform, and so Raven's trying to recreate that and give her that chance to perform, and so, she sets it all up, and now it's, like, time for the old she's an older lady now, but she's just trying to live out that dream that she never got to when she was younger, and so Raven's like, "Okay," just boosting her, hyping her up because she's nervous. She's like, "You can do it. You've always dreamt of this." And so she's hyped, and the woman is ready to perform. And what she says, "Let's get this joint jumping." And I was like, I know that that is a reference to Fats Waller because I'm sure when she was, younger when she was her younger years of an actress, it was probably roughly around the 1920s as well, and definitely was a Fats Waller reference. So it was really cool to see that. I definitely really enjoyed learning all of this about Fats Waller, because I was able to just make these connections in my real life, and that was really fun. And also, I really enjoy playing the piano. So I think over this summer break, it would be cool to try and look over some of his sheet music and try and learn some of that. I never knew about this stride piano technique. So I think that's going to be really fun. And I challenge myself to try and play some of his music. But thank you so much for listening to my author discussion. I hope that it was enjoyable. I definitely had a lot of fun learning about him. Thank you.